The town of Ravenswood had its share of urban legends, but none were as notorious as the tale of the house on Hawthorn Hill. It stood at the end of a long, winding road, nestled between towering oak trees whose branches seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers. The house was ancient, its wooden structure weathered by time, with ivy crawling up its walls as if trying to suffocate the very life out of it. No one knew who built it, and no one who entered ever lived to tell the tale. The house was known for its malevolence. It wasn't just haunted, it was alive. A dark, twisted entity that thrived on fear and death. It had an insidious way of luring people in, promising them safety, shelter, or even riches. But once inside, there was no escape. The house would find a way to kill them, no matter how clever they thought they were. The stories told by the townsfolk were terrifying: a young couple found hanging from the chandelier, an old man drowned in his own blood in the bathtub, a group of teenagers never seen again after they dared each other to spend the night. But the most disturbing thing about the house was that it didn't just kill, it manipulated the minds of its victims, driving them to insanity before it took their lives. It was as if the house enjoyed watching them suffer, feeding off their terror like a parasite. Chapter 1: The Dare. It was a crisp autumn evening when 5 friends decided to test the legend. Sarah, Mike, Emily, Jake, and Tom had heard the stories, but they were skeptical. They were college students, full of bravado and eager to prove the old tales wrong. They stood at the base of Hawthorn Hill, staring up at the house with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "You guys ready for this?" Mike asked, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "Come on, it's just an old house," Jake said with a grin. "We'll be in and out, and we'll have a great story to tell." Sarah, the most level-headed of the group, hesitated. "I don't know, guys. This place gives me the creeps." Emily rolled her eyes. "Don't tell me you're scared of some stupid ghost stories." Tom, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "Let's just do it. We'll go in, look around, and leave. No need to stay long." The decision was made, and with flashlights in hand, they began the climb up the hill. The wind howled through the trees, and the moon cast eerie shadows on the path. As they approached the house, they noticed the air growing colder, unnaturally so. The front door creaked open as they neared it, as if the house was inviting them in. "That's not creepy at all," Sarah muttered, but she followed the others inside. The interior was dark and musty, with the smell of decay lingering in the air. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs hung like drapes in the corners. The floorboards creaked under their weight, and the walls seemed to close in on them as they ventured deeper into the house. "Okay, let's split up and check this place out," Mike suggested. "We'll meet back here in 10 minutes. They all nodded, though none of them felt good about it. As they each headed in different directions, the house began to stir. Chapter 2: The House Awakens. Sarah wandered into what appeared to be the living room. Old furniture was covered in white sheets, and a grand piano stood in the corner, its keys yellowed with age. She felt a chill run down her spine as she approached the piano, her fingers itching to lift the cover and play a note. But as she reached out, the lid suddenly slammed shut, causing her to jump back in fright. "Get a grip, Sarah," she told herself, but her heart was pounding in her chest. Meanwhile, Mike had made his way to the kitchen. The appliances were old and rusted, and the sink was filled with dark, stagnant water. As he opened one of the cupboards, a swarm of cockroaches scurried out, making him gag in disgust. But really caught his attention was the large, ornate mirror on the wall. It was out of place in the dingy kitchen, its surface pristine and reflective. Mike couldn't resist his curiosity and stepped closer to examine it. As he did, his reflection twisted into a grotesque version of himself, grinning maniacally. "What the hell?" he whispered, backing away in horror. In the dining room, Emily was drawn to the large table at the center, set for a meal that never happened. Dust-covered plates and silverware were laid out meticulously, and a chandelier hung ominously overhead. She noticed a portrait on the wall, depicting a family: mother, father, and 2 children staring out with blank, soulless eyes. As Emily examined the painting, the figures began to move, their eyes following her every step. Jake and Tom were in the basement, a cold, damp space filled with forgotten relics. They found an old trunk and, with some effort, managed to pry it open. Inside were photographs, yellowed with age, showing various people standing in front of the house. But there was something wrong with the photos. Each person's face was distorted, twisted into expressions of pain and fear. "This is messed up," Jake said, his voice shaky. "We need to get out of here." But as they turned to leave, the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut with a deafening bang. The basement light flickered and then went out, plunging them into darkness. Jake called out, but there was no response. He fumbled for his flashlight, but when he turned it on, Tom was gone. In his place was a figure, tall and shadowy, with glowing red eyes. The figure moved closer, and Jake could feel the air grow heavy, suffocating him. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing he saw was the figure reaching out towards him, its hand cold and clammy as it touched his face. Chapter 3: The house takes control. Back in the living room, Sarah was growing increasingly uneasy. She could hear the sound of something moving upstairs, a slow, deliberate creak of floorboards. She called out to her friends, but her voice echoed through the empty house, unanswered. Deciding she had had enough, she headed for the front door, only to find it locked. No matter how hard she pulled or pushed, it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as she realized the house wasn't going to let her leave. She ran to the windows, but they too were sealed shut, the glass unbreakable. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in rhythm with her racing heart. Mike, still reeling from the vision in the mirror, stumbled back into the hallway. He saw Sarah struggling with the door and rushed over to help, but as he reached out, the door handle twisted and elongated, wrapping around his wrist like a snake. He cried out in pain as the metal tightened, burning his skin. "Sarah, help," he shouted, but she was frozen in place, her eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, the floor beneath them began to warp and twist, forming a gaping hole. The wood splintered and cracked as a dark, slimy substance oozed up from the depths. The house was alive, and it was hungry. Emily, unaware of what was happening downstairs, was trapped in the dining room. The chandelier above her began to sway violently, the candles flickering with an unnatural light. The portrait on the wall was now alive, the family's faces contorted into expressions of pure malice. They were watching her, waiting. As the chandelier's movement became more erratic, one of the chains snapped, sending it crashing down towards Emily. She dove out of the way just in time, but the impact shattered the table, sending shards of glass and splinters flying in all directions. One of the shards caught her arm, drawing blood. She screamed, clutching her wound, but her cries were drowned out by the sound of the house groaning and shifting around her. The walls seemed to close in, the ceiling lowering, threatening to crush her. She scrambled to her feet, desperate to find a way out, but every door she tried led her back into the same room. It was a twisted maze, designed to trap and torment. Jake, or what was left of him, stumbled out of the basement. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale and lifeless. He was no longer in control of his own body. The house had taken him, twisted him into a puppet. He wandered aimlessly, his movements jerky and unnatural, until he found himself in the hallway with Sarah and Mike. Sarah cried, but as she approached him, she realized something was horribly wrong. Jake's head jerked towards her, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. His voice was low and raspy, not his own. "Join us, Sarah. The house has chosen you." She backed away in horror, but there was nowhere to run. The house had them all trapped, and it wasn't going to let them go. Chapter 4: The Final Stand. Tom, who had somehow escaped the basement, found himself in the attic, a dark, dusty space filled with forgotten memories. He could hear the screams of his friends echoing through the house, but he was too afraid to move. The attic felt safe, in a way, like a haven from the horrors below, but he knew it. If you enjoyed the chills and thrills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more spine-tingling stories. See you in the next video.